Critic shouted at a waitress for TikTok until her mother walked in and confronted him publicly. "Do you have any idea how incompetent you are right now?" The words cut through the morning bustle of Sunrise Cafe like a blade, sharp enough to make every conversation stop and every head turn toward the corner booth where David Rodriguez was berating a 19-year-old waitress over a coffee order that had taken 30 seconds too long to arrive. His phone was propped against the sugar dispenser camera, rolling capturing every moment of what he would later title, "How Not to Provide Customer Service, Epic Fail Compilation." Part 47. David's 2.1 million TikTok followers had come to expect this content. Public confrontations with service workers exposing their supposed incompetence for viral entertainment. What David didn't know was that the trembling young woman trying to balance his complicated order while he screamed at her for content was named Sofia Martinez. She was working 2 jobs to pay for nursing school, sending half her earnings to help her mother recover from cancer treatment, and today marked her first week back at work after 3 days of caring for that same mother through chemotherapy. And what David absolutely couldn't have predicted was that in exactly 4 minutes, Carmen Martinez would walk through the cafe door for their planned mother-daughter lunch, see her child being publicly humiliated by a grown man with a camera, and remind everyone in that cafe what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. The viral video David was creating would indeed go viral, but not in the way he had planned. If you find value in real stories told with clarity and truth, make sure to subscribe to stay informed with Real Father Story. The content creator, David Rodriguez, had built his empire on other people's misery, and he was very good at it. At 34, he had mastered the art of manufactured outrage, turning everyday interactions into viral content that fed his audience's appetite for conflict. His TikTok account, Our Real Talk David, specialized in exposing incompetent service workers, calling out inefficient businesses, and keeping it real with people he deemed insufficiently respectful of his self-proclaimed importance. The formula was simple. Find a service worker having a normal human moment, escalate a minor issue into a major confrontation film, their confusion and distress, then edit the footage to make himself look like a righteous consumer advocate, standing up for standards. His followers loved it. Comments like, "Finally someone who doesn't let these lazy workers get away with it," and "You're doing God's work, David," fed his sense of mission. Brand partnerships with meal delivery services and customer service apps had turned his cruelty into a 6-figure income. David had chosen Sunrise Cafe for today's content because it represented everything he claimed to hate about modern service culture. The small family-owned business prioritized warmth over efficiency, community over profit, and treated their mostly young staff like family members rather than disposable labor. Perfect target material. He had ordered his usual trap, a complicated custom drink designed to create confusion and delay, then acted increasingly frustrated as the staff tried to accommodate his deliberately unreasonable demands. A oat milk macchiato with half the usual espresso extra hot, but not too hot with sugar-free vanilla, but only half a pump served in a ceramic cup, but with a disposable lid for hygiene reasons. The order was designed to fail. David's content strategy depended on service workers being unable to meet impossible standards, giving him the footage he needed to portray them as incompetent, while positioning himself as the reasonable customer fighting against declining service quality. Sofia Martinez had been his target from the moment she approached his table. Young, nervous, clearly new to the job, exactly the kind of vulnerable service worker his audience enjoyed watching him educate about proper customer service. David had started filming the moment Sofia took his order, his phone discreetly positioned to capture her confusion without being obvious about his intentions. The camera rolled as she repeated his complicated specifications back to him, as she checked with her supervisor about the unusual modifications, as she carefully prepared his drink with the focused attention of someone who genuinely wanted to get it right. When Sofia returned with his order, after what David timed as exactly 2 minutes and 37 seconds, barely longer than any reasonable person would expect for a custom drink. He was ready with his performance. "Excuse me," he said loudly, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to being filmed. "How long does it take to make a simple coffee?" Sophia's face flushed. "I'm sorry, sir. Your drink had several modifications, so I wanted to make sure." "I don't want excuses." David interrupted, his volume increasing for the camera. "I want competent service. Do you understand the difference?" Other customers began to notice the disturbance. David felt the familiar rush of public attention, the electricity of creating a scene that would generate views, comments, and algorithmic engagement. Sophia tried to de-escalate. "I apologize for any delay. Would you like me to remake your drink?" "What I'd like," David said, standing now for maximum intimidation effect, "is for you to understand that when a customer places an order, they expect professional service, not amateur hour fumbling." His phone captured Sophia's growing distress, her hands shaking slightly as she tried to maintain her composure. This was exactly the content David's audience craved, a young service worker being held accountable for supposed incompetence. "I really am sorry," Sophia said quietly. "I'm still learning and—" "That's not my problem," David snapped. "Your training issues don't excuse wasting my time. Do you have any idea how incompetent you are right now?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back with the practiced resilience of someone who had learned early that crying at work was a luxury she couldn't afford. David's camera captured every moment of her struggle to maintain professionalism while being publicly humiliated. This was the money shot. This was the moment that would generate hundreds of thousands of views and thousands of comments from followers who would praise David for not tolerating bad service while completely missing the human cost of his content creation. David was already mentally crafting the video's caption when he noticed Sophia's attention shift toward the cafe entrance. Her expression changed from distressed professional composure to something that looked almost like relief. "Mom," Sophia whispered. David turned to follow her gaze and saw a woman in her 40s walking through the door wearing scrubs that suggested she'd come straight from a medical job. The woman had Sophia's eyes and Sophia's determined chin. But where Sophia looked young and overwhelmed, this woman looked like she had faced down much worse things than entitled customers with cameras. Carmen Martinez had arrived for their lunch date, and she had heard every word of David's performance. The mother's arrival, Carmen Martinez, had been looking forward to this lunch all week. After 3 months of chemotherapy that had left her weak, nauseous, and barely able to work her shifts as a medical assistant, she was finally strong enough to meet her daughter for their traditional Thursday meal. Sophia had insisted they maintain the tradition even when Carmen was too sick to leave the house, bringing takeout to her mother's apartment and eating together while Carmen dozed between bites. Today was supposed to be a celebration. Carmen's latest scans had shown the cancer responding to treatment. Sophia had just started her 2nd year of nursing school while working 2 jobs. Things were finally looking up for the Martinez family after the hardest year of their lives. Carmen pushed through the cafe door with the careful energy of someone still rebuilding their strength, her medical scrubs a testament to her determination to return to the work she loved despite her body's betrayal. She had gotten off her shift 20 minutes early, eager to see Sophia and share the good news about her test results. Instead, she walked into a nightmare. The first thing Carmen heard was a man's voice, loud and aggressive, cutting through the cafe's usual gentle atmosphere like broken glass. The second thing she saw was her daughter, her brilliant, hard-working, impossibly strong daughter, standing frozen while a stranger berated her in front of a room full of people. "Do you have any idea how incompetent you are right now?" The words hit Carmen like a physical blow. She had spent 19 years protecting Sophia from the world's cruelties, working double shifts to keep food on the table, sacrificing her own dreams to ensure her daughter could pursue an education. She had raised Sophia to be kind, respectful, and hard-working, qualities that made her an excellent nursing student and a beloved employee, but also made her an easy target for bullies who mistook gentleness for weakness. Carmen took in the scene with the rapid assessment skills her medical training had taught her. Adult male approximately 35 years old, well-dressed, holding a phone in a position that suggested he was recording. Elevated voice, aggressive posture positioned to maximize public attention. Her daughter tears threatening hands, shaking, clearly distressed, but trying to maintain professionalism. Predator and prey. Carmen had survived poverty discrimination, an abusive ex-husband, and stage 2 breast cancer. She had no intention of letting some entitled stranger with a camera add to her daughter's struggles for his own entertainment. She walked toward the confrontation with the deliberate pace of someone who had learned that real power didn't need to announce itself with volume or theatrics. Other customers noticed her approach. There was something about Carmen's presence that commanded attention without demanding it. Sophia saw her mother first. "Mom," she whispered, and Carmen caught the relief and embarrassment in her daughter's voice. David turned to see what had distracted his target and found himself facing a woman whose expression suggested he had just made the biggest mistake of his entitled life. Carmen Martinez was 46 years old, 5 feet 4 inches tall, and weighed maybe 120 pounds after her recent weight loss from treatment. But she carried herself with the authority of someone who had fought much bigger battles than dealing with social media bullies, and won. "Is there a problem here?" Carmen asked, her voice calm, but carrying an undercurrent that made every person in the cafe stop their conversations to listen. David's performer instincts kicked in. Another person meant a bigger audience, more dramatic content, higher engagement potential. "Yes, actually, there is a problem. Your daughter, my daughter—" Carmen interrupted, and there was steel in her voice now, "is one of the hardest working people I know. She's paying her own way through nursing school while working 2 jobs and helping me recover from cancer treatment. So I'm very interested to hear what problem you think you have with her." The cafe had gone completely silent. David's phone continued recording, but the dynamic had shifted in a way he didn't understand yet. This wasn't going according to his usual script. "Look, lady, I don't care about your personal problems," David said, his voice rising to maintain control of the narrative. "I ordered a simple coffee, and your daughter took forever to make it correctly. That's not acceptable customer service, and I'm not going to pretend it is just because you want to make excuses for her." Carmen looked at David's phone, then at Sophia, then back at David with an expression that would have made seasoned emergency room doctors step carefully. "You're filming this," she observed. "That's right," David said, mistaking her calm tone for acceptance. "People need to see what passes for service these days. Maybe if more customers held these workers accountable." "Accountable," Carmen repeated, and something in the way she said the word made David's confidence falter slightly. "You want to hold my 19-year-old daughter accountable for taking 2.5 minutes to make your custom coffee order." "That's not the point." "What is the point?" Carmen asked, stepping closer. "Explain to me and to everyone in this cafe who's watching your little performance what exactly you're trying to accomplish here." David looked around and realized that every person in Sunrise Cafe was indeed watching him. But their expressions weren't supportive. They looked disgusted, uncomfortable, and increasingly angry as they understood what they were witnessing. "I'm documenting poor customer service," David said, but his voice had lost some of its aggressive certainty. "You're bullying a teenager for internet points," Carmen corrected. "You're filming my daughter's distress so you can post it online for strangers to mock. You're treating her like she's not a human being with feelings, dreams, and challenges just because she happens to be serving you coffee." Carmen's voice never rose above normal conversation level, but it carried through the silent cafe like a judgment being rendered. "And the saddest part," she continued, "is that you think this makes you look strong. You think humiliating a young woman who can't fight back without risking her job makes you some kind of hero standing up for standards." David opened his mouth to respond, but Carmen wasn't finished. "Let me tell you what I see when I look at you," she said. "I see a grown man so desperate for attention, so hungry for validation from strangers, that he's willing to traumatize service workers for content. I see someone so insecure about his own worth that he has to tear down others to feel important. The words landed like punches, precise and devastating. David's phone was still recording, capturing every moment of his public dismantling by a woman who had learned to fight battles that actually mattered. "Ma'am," he said, trying to regain control. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Carmen said. "You picked on my daughter because you thought she was powerless. You thought she was alone. You thought no one would stand up for her." She smiled, and it was not a kind expression. "You were wrong." The confrontation, the silence in Sunrise Cafe was absolute, broken only by the soft hiss of the espresso machine and the sound of David's world beginning to crumble. Carmen Martinez stood between her daughter and the phone camera with the protective instincts of a mother bear, but her approach was surgical rather than savage. Years of working in healthcare had taught her that the most effective way to deal with aggressive patients wasn't to match their energy, but to deflate it with calm, unshakable authority. "Turn off the camera," she said to David. "I don't have to turn off the camera." Carmen repeated her voice, carrying the weight of someone who had given orders in emergency situations and expected them to be followed immediately. David looked around the cafe and realized that every single person was staring at him with expressions ranging from disappointment to disgust. His usual audience of enablers, customers who enjoyed watching service workers get put in their place, was nowhere to be found. Instead, he faced a room full of people who clearly saw him as the villain in this story. "This is public property," David said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I have the right to record." "You have the right to be a decent human being," interrupted an elderly man from a nearby table. "But apparently you've chosen not to exercise it." A woman in business attire looked up from her laptop. "I've been watching you harass that poor girl for 5 minutes. It's disgusting." Carmen watched David process the room's hostility with the clinical interest of someone observing a patient's vital signs. His breathing had quickened, his posture had become defensive, and his eyes were darting around looking for escape routes or allies. Classic fight-or-flight response from someone whose usual power dynamic had been completely reversed. "Sophia," Carmen said, without taking her eyes off David. "Tell everyone what you were doing before you started this job today." Sophia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I was at the hospital with Mom for her follow-up appointment. Her cancer treatment is working, and we found out this morning that her tumors are shrinking." A murmur of sympathy and support rippled through the cafe. Carmen continued her strategic dismantling of David's narrative. "Tell them about school," she prompted. "I'm in my 2nd year of nursing school," Sophia said, her voice growing stronger. "I work here and at a medical clinic to pay tuition. I want to be a pediatric nurse." Carmen looked directly at David's phone camera. "So, let me make sure I understand your content strategy. You decided to film yourself screaming at a future pediatric nurse who's working multiple jobs to pay for school while helping her mother through cancer treatment, because your coffee took an extra 30 seconds. The mathematical precision of her summary made David's behavior look even more monstrous than it had in real time. "And you thought," Carmen continued, "that this would make you look good, that your followers would praise you for bullying a teenager, that humiliating my daughter would somehow improve the world." David's face had gone pale. His usual confident demeanor was cracking like cheap paint under pressure. People need to see customer service standards," he stammered. "Customer service standards," Carmen repeated. "Let's talk about standards." She turned to address the entire cafe, but her words were clearly meant for David and his still-recording phone. "I've worked in healthcare for 22 years. I've seen people at their worst moments, scared in pain, facing death or disability, and you know what I've learned. How you treat people who can't fight back tells you everything you need to know about someone's character." Carmen gestured towards Sophia. "My daughter has been nothing but polite, professional, and apologetic throughout your little performance. She offered to remake your drink. She tried to de-escalate your manufactured outrage. She treated you with more respect than you deserved. But you weren't looking for good service," Carmen continued. "You were looking for content. You were hoping she would break down, cry, or fight back so you could film it and post it for strangers to mock. You were treating her pain as entertainment. David's phone was still recording, but now it was capturing his own humiliation rather than Sophia's. The reversal was complete. The predator had become the prey. "Do you have children?" Carmen asked suddenly. David nodded reluctantly. "A daughter. She's 16. The admission hung in the air like an indictment. "How would you feel?" Carmen asked quietly. "If someone treated your 16-year-old daughter the way you just treated mine, if some stranger with a camera decided to make content out of humiliating her at her job." David's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. For the first time since he'd started creating content, he was seeing his actions from the victim's perspective. Carmen pulled out her own phone, and David flinched as if she might start recording him. Instead, she showed him a photo of Sophia in her nursing school scrubs, beaming with pride after passing a difficult exam. "This is who you decided to attack for internet points," she said. "A young woman who spends her days learning to save lives, and her evenings serving coffee to pay for that education. A daughter who works 2 jobs so she can help her sick mother. A human being with dreams, goals, and feelings." Carmen put her phone away and looked directly into David's eyes. "I want you to imagine going home tonight and explaining to your daughter what you did today. I want you to imagine showing her the video you just made where you scream at someone her age for taking too long with your coffee order. I want you to imagine her asking you why you thought that was okay." David's hands were shaking now. The confident influencer persona had completely evaporated, leaving behind a middle-aged man confronting the ugliness of his own behavior. "Now," Carmen said, her voice taking on the authority of someone issuing final instructions, "you're going to apologize to my daughter. You're going to delete that video. And you're going to leave this cafe and think very carefully about what kind of person you want to be." She paused, then added with devastating quiet precision, "Because right now the only thing your content is documenting is your own moral bankruptcy." The entire cafe erupted in applause, the sound washing over David like a wave of judgment he couldn't escape or deflect. His phone was still recording every second of his complete and total defeat. The unraveling. David stared at his phone screen, watching the view counter climb as his public humiliation was broadcast live to his 2.1 million followers. But for the first time in his content creation career, the rising numbers filled him with dread rather than excitement. The comments section was exploding, but not with the usual support he expected when confronting service workers. Instead, his followers were turning on him with the same vicious energy they usually directed at his targets. "This is disgusting even for you, David. Imagine bullying someone with cancer for clout. Your daughter is going to see this. How are you going to explain it?" "Unsubscribing. This is too far." Carmen watched David read his own comments with the clinical fascination of someone observing a car accident in slow motion. She had seen this type of person before in her medical work. Bullies who derived their sense of power from others' vulnerability, but who crumbled completely when their behavior was exposed to public scrutiny. "The ironic thing," Carmen said conversationally, "is that you've actually created the perfect content today, just not the kind you intended." David looked up from his phone, confusion cutting through his mortification. "You set out to film incompetent customer service," Carmen explained. "Instead, you've documented incompetent human behavior. You wanted to show your followers what poor standards look like. Mission accomplished, except the poor standards are yours." Sophia had been watching her mother dismantle David with a mixture of amazement and pride. She had never seen Carmen in full protective mode before, had never witnessed the steel that 22 years of healthcare work had forged in her gentle mother's spine. "Mom," Sophia whispered, "you don't have to—" "Yes, I do," Carmen said firmly. "Because if I don't stand up for you now, I'm telling you that this behavior is acceptable. I'm teaching you that you have to tolerate being treated like you're less than human just because you're serving someone coffee." She looked back at David, who was still staring at his phone, as his follower count began to drop in real time. "But more importantly," Carmen continued, "I'm teaching him that his actions have consequences, that there are still people in this world who won't stand by and watch bullying happen without speaking up." An elderly woman at a nearby table stood up and walked over to Sophia. "Honey," she said gently, "I want you to know that what just happened to you was wrong. You did nothing to deserve that treatment." A college student looked up from his textbook. "I've been coming here for 2 years. You're always super nice to everyone. That guy's just a jerk." One by one, other customers began voicing their support for Sophia and their disgust with David's behavior. The cafe that had been silent during his attack was now filled with voices defending the young woman he had tried to humiliate. David watched his content strategy implode as the very audience he had hoped to entertain turned against him. Worse, he was beginning to see his behavior through their eyes and through the eyes of his own teenage daughter, who would inevitably see this video. He started, then stopped. For someone who made his living talking, David found himself speechless. Carmen waited patiently. She had learned in healthcare that sometimes the most powerful intervention was simply creating space for people to confront their own actions without escape or excuse. "I was just trying to create content," David said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "At my daughter's expense," Carmen replied. "At the expense of her dignity, her emotional well-being, and her sense of safety at work." David looked at Sophia, really seeing her for the first time as a person rather than a prop in his performance. She was young, younger than his own daughter. Her eyes were red from fighting back tears, her hands still trembling from the adrenaline of being publicly attacked. "I have a daughter," he said quietly. "You mentioned that," Carmen said. "How do you think she's going to feel when she sees this video? When her friends see it? When her teachers see it?" The question hit David like a physical blow. He imagined his daughter Emma watching him scream at Sophia, seeing the fear and distress in the young woman's eyes, wondering what kind of father she had. "What would you tell Emma?" Carmen pressed. "If someone treated her the way you just treated Sophia?" David's phone buzzed with notifications, but he couldn't bring himself to look. His comment section was probably on fire, his reputation was in ruins, and his daughter would soon see the worst version of himself broadcast to the world. "I would want to protect her," he admitted. "Then why?" Carmen asked with devastating gentleness. "Did you think Sophia deserved less protection than Emma? Why did you think her feelings mattered less? Why did you think her dignity was worth sacrificing for your entertainment?" The question stripped away every rationalization David had constructed around his content creation. He couldn't claim he was holding people accountable. He was exploiting them. He couldn't pretend he was educating his audience. He was feeding their worst impulses. He couldn't argue he was making the world better. He was making it crueler, one viral video at a time. "I don't know," David said, and for the first time in years he was telling the complete truth. "I honestly don't know why I thought any of this was okay." Carmen studied his face with the diagnostic skills her medical training had taught her. She saw genuine remorse beginning to crack through his defensive shell, saw him starting to process the real human cost of his digital empire. "The question," Carmen said, "is what you're going to do about it now." David looked at his phone, then at Sophia, then back at Carmen. The cafe full of people was watching him, waiting to see if he was capable of something resembling redemption, or if he would retreat into defensiveness and denial. For the first time in his content creation career, David Rodriguez had a choice to make that actually mattered: continue being the person who bullied teenagers for internet points, or become someone his daughter might not be ashamed to call her father. The decision would define not just his future, but his daughter's understanding of what kind of person she wanted to become. The phone was still recording every second of his moral reckoning. The choice. David looked at his phone screen, where the live viewer count showed 47,000 people watching his public moral collapse in real time. His finger hovered over the End Live button, but something stopped him. These people, his followers, his audience, his enablers, needed to see this moment as much as he needed to live it. "I need to apologize," David said, his voice barely audible above the cafe's resumed conversations. Carmen nodded. "Yes, you do." David turned to Sophia, who was watching him with the cautious attention of someone who had learned not to trust adult men who spoke loudly in public spaces. "Sophia." He began, then stopped. "How did you apologize for treating someone like they weren't human? How did you take back the humiliation you had broadcast to thousands of strangers?" "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling inadequate and clumsy. "I'm sorry for yelling at you. I'm sorry for filming you without permission. I'm sorry for trying to make you feel small so I could feel important." Sophia looked at her mother, then back at David. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why did you do it?" The question was simple, but it cut to the heart of everything David had spent years avoiding examining about himself and his work. "Because I'm a coward." David admitted the words, surprising him with their honesty. "Because it's easier to punch down at people who can't fight back than to create content that actually has value. Because I built my whole career on making other people feel bad, so my audience could feel superior." Carmen watched this confession with the professional interest of someone who had seen many patients confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. Some people broke down completely. Others became defensive and angry. A rare few found something like wisdom in the wreckage of their self-deception. David pulled out his phone and did something he had never done in 5 years of content creation. He addressed his audience honestly. "I want everyone watching this to really look at what just happened here," he said to the camera. "I came into this cafe planning to bully a teenage girl for content. I was going to film her distress and post it for all of you to mock and share." The comment section exploded, but David didn't look at it. Sophia is 19 years old. She's in nursing school. She works 2 jobs. She's helping her mother recover from cancer treatment, and I decided that humiliating her would make good entertainment. David turned the camera toward Carmen and Sophia. "This is Carmen Martinez. She just showed me what it looks like when someone actually stands up for what's right, instead of just performing outrage for views." Carmen looked directly into the camera. "I want everyone watching this to understand something. The young people who serve your food, ring up your purchases, and help you in stores are someone's children. They have dreams, struggles, and feelings just like you do. They deserve respect, not ridicule." She paused, then added with quiet intensity, "And if you're someone who enjoys watching content where service workers get bullied and humiliated, you need to ask yourself what that says about who you are as a person." David turned the camera back to himself. "I've been making content like this for years. Millions of views, hundreds of thousands of followers, brand partnerships worth more money than I want to admit. All built on making people feel bad about themselves." He looked around the cafe at the faces watching him with mixture of curiosity, disgust, and something that might have been hope. "My daughter is 16, David continued. "She's going to see this video. She's going to watch her father scream at someone her age for taking too long with a coffee order. She's going to see me treat a young woman like garbage for internet points." David's voice cracked slightly. "And I have no idea how I'm going to explain to her that the person in this video is supposed to be someone she can look up to." Carmen stepped closer to the camera. "You explain it by becoming someone different," she said. "You explain it by acknowledging that you were wrong, making amends for the harm you've caused, and choosing to be better." David nodded slowly. "I'm going to delete every video I've ever made that involved confronting or embarrassing service workers. I'm going to donate the money I made from those videos to organizations that support workers' rights and dignity." He looked at Sophia. "And I'm going to use my platform to share stories about people like Sophia, students working multiple jobs to achieve their dreams, young people making sacrifices to help their families, service workers who deserve respect instead of ridicule." Sophia wiped her eyes and managed a small smile. "Thank you," she said quietly. David looked back at his phone camera for his final statement. "To everyone who's been watching my content and enjoying it when I humiliate people, I want you to think about Sophia's story. I want you to remember that every person serving you is someone's child, someone's hope for the future, someone trying to make their life better through honest work." He paused, gathering his courage for what he knew would be the most important words of his online career. And to every service worker who's ever been treated badly by customers, especially customers with cameras, I'm sorry. You deserve better. You deserve respect. You deserve to go to work without worrying that someone might decide to make you into content for their entertainment. David ended the live stream with 23,000 people still watching his comment section in chaos, and his entire worldview shattered beyond recognition. But for the first time in years, he felt like someone his daughter might not be ashamed to know. Carmen put her arm around Sophia's shoulders. "Come on, honey, let's get that lunch we planned. You've earned it." As they walked toward their usual table, Sophia looked back at David, who was staring at his phone with the expression of someone seeing themselves clearly for the first time. "Do you think people can really change, Mom?" she asked. Carmen smiled and squeezed her daughter's hand. "I think some people can," she said, "but only if they want to badly enough." Behind them, David Rodriguez sat alone in his corner booth, surrounded by the smoking ruins of his digital empire, finally understanding the difference between being watched and being seen. The reckoning continues. Within hours, David's live stream had been screen recorded and shared across every social media platform. But unlike his usual viral content, this video wasn't being shared to mock service workers. It was being shared to mock him. Sure. Karma at Sunrise Cafe began trending on Twitter. TikTok users created response videos dissecting David's behavior and praising Carmen's intervention. Instagram accounts dedicated to exposing influencer bad behavior made David their featured content creator. But the most devastating response came from someone David hadn't expected: his own daughter. Emma Rodriguez was 16, sharp-eyed, and had inherited her father's gift for cutting straight to the truth. She had watched the live stream in real time from her bedroom, her heart sinking as she recognized the man screaming at a girl barely older than herself. She posted her response video 3 hours after David's stream ended. "Hi everyone, I'm Emma Rodriguez, and the man you just watched humiliate a teenage waitress for TikTok content is my father." Emma spoke with the brutal honesty that only teenagers could manage, her words surgical in their precision. "I want everyone to know that the person you saw in that cafe is not the father I thought I knew. The man who raised me taught me to be kind to service workers, to say please and thank you, to treat everyone with respect regardless of their job." She paused, her young face serious with the weight of public disappointment. "But apparently that was just who he was at home. Online, he's been making money by being cruel to people who can't fight back. He's been teaching his followers that it's funny to watch service workers get humiliated. He's been profiting from other people's pain." Emma's video was raw, unfiltered, and devastating in its simple honesty. "The girl he screamed at today, Sophia, she's only 3 years older than me. She's working to pay for nursing school. She's helping her mom through cancer treatment. And my father decided that her struggle was content for his entertainment." The teenager looked directly into her phone camera, with eyes that carried her father's intensity, but none of his cruelty. "I'm embarrassed to be related to him right now. I'm ashamed that I share his last name. And I'm terrified that people will think his behavior represents how I was raised." Emma's video went viral faster than her father's original content ever had. Comments poured in from teenagers who supported her courage, parents who praised her moral clarity, and former followers of David's who thanked her for speaking out. But the comment that mattered most came from Sophia herself. "Your father apologized and seemed genuinely sorry. Maybe give him a chance to prove he can be better. The world needs more people willing to change, not fewer." David saw his daughter's video 2 hours after it was posted, when his phone buzzed with a notification that she had tagged him. He watched it in his hotel room. He'd been too ashamed to go home and face Emma in person. Every word felt like a knife, not because Emma was being cruel, but because she was being truthful. He had raised her to have strong moral principles, then spent years violating those same principles for profit. David called Emma immediately after watching her video. "Dad." Her voice was small, younger than her usual confident tone. "Emma, I saw your video. Are you mad at me for posting it?" The question broke David's heart. His daughter was afraid he would be angry at her for speaking truth about his behavior, for having moral standards he had failed to meet. "No, baby, I'm proud of you. You did the right thing even though it was hard, even though it meant calling out your own father." Emma was quiet for a long moment. "Why did you do it, Dad? Why did you think it was okay to treat people like that?" David stared out his hotel window at a city full of people whose stories he had never bothered to learn, whose dignity he had never considered worth protecting. "I lost my way," he said honestly. "I got so focused on views and followers and money that I forgot the person I wanted to be. I forgot the values I taught you." "Can you find your way back?" The question carried all of David's hope and fear wrapped together. Could he become someone his daughter could be proud of again? Could he rebuild his relationship with Emma while dismantling the empire of cruelty he had built? "I'm going to try," David said. "But it's going to take time, and it's going to mean starting over completely." "What about your followers? Your brand deals your income." David looked at his phone where notifications continued to flood in. His follower count was dropping by thousands every hour. Brands were sending termination emails. His agent had left 3 increasingly panicked voicemails. "Gone," he said simply. "All of it. And you know what, I'm glad. I don't want to make money from hurting people anymore." Emma was quiet again, processing this information. "I love you, Dad," she said finally. "But I need you to prove that you're serious about changing. I need to see that the person who raised me is still in there somewhere." "I will," David promised. "I'll prove it every day if I have to." After they hung up, David opened his laptop and began the hardest work of his life, deleting 5 years' worth of content that had built his career on other people's pain. Video after video disappeared from his channels. Confrontations with cashiers, arguments with wait staff, exposés of service workers who had committed no crime other than being human while David pointed a camera at them. Each deletion felt like losing money followers' relevance, but it also felt like reclaiming his soul. Meanwhile, at Sunrise Cafe, Sophia was finishing her shift with a lightness she hadn't felt in weeks. The afternoon's traumatic start had transformed into something unexpected, a reminder that there were still people in the world who would stand up for what was right. Carmen had stayed for their entire lunch, sharing good news about her test results and listening to Sophia talk about her favorite nursing classes. They had barely mentioned David's outburst, both women choosing to focus on the future rather than dwelling on one stranger's moment of moral bankruptcy. But as Sophia cleaned tables and prepared to close, she found herself thinking about David's daughter Emma, whose video response had shown more wisdom and courage than many adults ever managed. Sophia pulled out her own phone and recorded a short message. "Hi Emma, this is Sophia from the cafe. I saw your video and I wanted you to know something. Your father hurt my feelings today, but your response to his behavior made me feel hopeful about your generation. You spoke up for what was right, even when it was hard. That tells me he raised you well, even if he lost his way for a while." Sophia paused, choosing her words carefully. People can change if they really want to. Maybe give your dad a chance to prove he can be the person who raised you to have such strong moral principles. The world needs more people willing to do better, not fewer. She posted the video with the hashtag #ChorchGrowthAndForgiveness, adding her voice to a conversation that had moved beyond mockery toward something more constructive, a discussion about accountability change and the possibility of redemption. David saw Sophia's video at 11 p.m., sitting in his hotel room, surrounded by the wreckage of his former career. The young woman he had humiliated that morning was defending his potential for growth to his own daughter. It was more grace than he deserved, and exactly the motivation he needed to become someone worthy of it. For the first time in years, David Rodriguez went to sleep without checking his view counts, his follower numbers, or his comment sections. Instead, he spent the evening planning how to rebuild his relationship with his daughter and his relationship with his own conscience. The content creator who had built his empire on other people's misery was dead. What would rise from those ashes remained to be seen. The transformation. 3 months later, David Rodriguez stood outside Sunrise Cafe holding a manila envelope and trying to work up the courage to go inside. The last 3 months had been the hardest of his adult life. His social media empire had collapsed completely. Follower counts dropped to near zero, brand partnerships evaporated, and his agent had stopped returning his calls. His savings were nearly gone after donating his confrontation content earnings to worker advocacy organizations and paying for therapy to understand how he had become someone who profited from cruelty. But something else had happened during those months of financial and professional ruin. David had rediscovered the person he used to be before algorithms and engagement metrics had corrupted his values. He had started volunteering at a nonprofit that provided job training for low-income youth. He had taken a part-time position teaching digital literacy at a community center. He had learned to find meaning in work that helped people rather than hurt them. Most importantly, he had slowly rebuilt his relationship with Emma. It started with honest conversations about his behavior, continued with family therapy sessions, and was strengthened by David's consistent actions to become someone better. Emma had moved back in with him 2 weeks ago after 3 months of living with her aunt, while David proved he was serious about changing. Her return felt like a miracle David wasn't sure he deserved. Now he stood outside the cafe where his transformation had begun, holding printed copies of articles about his volunteer work, his donations to worker advocacy groups, and his new career in community education. The envelope also contained something else, a formal letter of apology to Sophia and Carmen Martinez, along with information about a scholarship fund David had established for students like Sophia, who were working multiple jobs to pay for healthcare education. David pushed through the door and immediately recognized Sophia behind the counter. She looked up as the bell chimed, and he saw the moment she recognized him. Her body tensing slightly, her professional smile becoming more cautious. "Mr. Rodriguez," she said politely. "What can I get for you today?" David approached the counter slowly, his hands visible, and his demeanor completely different from his previous visit. Where he had once radiated aggressive entitlement, he now carried himself with the humility of someone who had learned hard lessons about human dignity. "I'm not here to order anything," David said quietly. "I came to apologize properly and to share something I hope will make a difference." Sophia glanced toward the kitchen where Carmen was visible, helping with the lunch prep. At Sophia's subtle signal, Carmen emerged, her expression watchful but not hostile. "Mrs. Martinez," David said, nodding respectfully. "Thank you for taking a moment to speak with me." Carmen studied David with the clinical attention she brought to evaluating patients. He looked different. Thinner, more tired, but also more present. The performative confidence had been replaced by something that looked like genuine humility. "What can we do for you?" Carmen asked. David held up the envelope. "I wanted to share what's happened since that day 3 months ago, and to tell you both how profoundly you changed my life." He opened the envelope and spread several documents on the counter. "This is verification that I donated all the money I made from confrontation content to the Service Workers Alliance and the Restaurant Workers United Fund," David explained. "About $180,000 total." Carmen's eyebrows rose slightly. That was more money than she made in 3 years as a medical assistant. "This," David continued, pulling out another document, "is information about the Sophia Martinez Scholarship Fund I established at the community college. It provides full tuition support for students working in service industries while pursuing healthcare degrees." Sophia stared at the paperwork with wide eyes. You named it after me." "Your story made me realize how many students are working multiple jobs to achieve their dreams, while getting treated poorly by customers who see them as less than human," David said. "I wanted to honor that struggle and help make it a little easier for others." He pulled out photos from his volunteer work at the community center. "I've been teaching digital literacy classes to help people understand how to protect themselves from online harassment and how to use technology positively. I'm also working with the nonprofit to create guidelines for ethical content creation." Carmen examined the documents with the thoroughness of someone accustomed to reviewing medical charts. Everything appeared legitimate. Official letterheads, verified donation receipts, professional references. "Why?" she asked simply. David looked at both women, remembering the person he had been 3 months ago, and marveling at the distance he had traveled. "Because you showed me what I had become," he said honestly. "Because your daughter deserved better than how I treated her. Because my daughter deserved a father she could be proud of." He pulled out his phone and showed them Emma's latest video. Not a response to his behavior this time, but a collaboration where they discussed healthy social media use and the importance of treating service workers with respect. "Emma and I are creating educational content now," David explained. "Teaching young people about digital citizenship empathy and the real human cost of online cruelty." Sophia looked at the scholarship information again. "This says it covers full tuition books and living expenses for 4 students per year." David nodded. "The fund is set up to be permanent. I liquidated most of my assets to establish it properly." Carmen studied David's face with renewed interest. "What do you do for work now?" "I teach digital literacy at 3 community centers and work part-time at a non-profit helping young people develop job skills," David said. "It doesn't pay much, but it pays enough. And more importantly, I go to bed every night knowing I helped people instead of hurting them." The cafe had filled with the usual lunch crowd, and Sophia needed to return to work. But before she did, she had one more question. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "The followers, the money, the attention." David considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the financial security, but I don't miss the person I had to be to maintain it. I don't miss waking up every day looking for someone to humiliate. I don't miss my daughter being ashamed of me." He gathered up the papers and returned them to the envelope, which he placed on the counter. "This is all yours," he said to Sophia. "The scholarship information, the contact details for the fund administrator, and a letter explaining everything in detail." David turned to Carmen. "I also want you to know that I've been speaking at conferences about workplace dignity and online harassment. I tell my story, including that day here, to help business owners understand the importance of protecting their employees from customers who think cameras give them the right to be cruel." Carmen nodded slowly. "That's good work. It's the least I can do," David said. "You and Sophia changed my life that day. You reminded me that every person serving the public is someone's child, someone's hope, someone deserving of basic human respect." As David prepared to leave, Sophia called out to him, "Mr. Rodriguez, thank you for the scholarship, for the work you're doing now, and for proving that people really can change." David smiled, genuinely without the performative edge that had characterized his on-camera expressions for years. "Thank you," he said, "for believing that change was possible even when I didn't deserve that faith." As David walked out of Sunrise Cafe, Carmen put her arm around Sophia's shoulders. "What do you think?" Carmen asked. Sophia watched through the window as David got into a modest used car, a far cry from the luxury vehicle he had driven during his influencer days. "I think," Sophia said slowly, "that sometimes the people who fall the furthest have the longest climb back up. But that makes it mean more when they actually make the effort." Carmen squeezed her daughter's hand. "I think you're right." That evening, Sophia posted a video about the scholarship fund, encouraging other service workers to apply and sharing her belief that people could change when they genuinely committed to growth. The video went viral. But this time the virality spread hope instead of humiliation, education instead of exploitation, and proof that redemption was possible for those willing to do the hard work of becoming better. David saw the video from his small apartment where he was preparing lesson plans for his next digital citizenship class. Emma sat beside him, working on homework, and occasionally offering suggestions for his curriculum. "I'm proud of you, Dad," Emma said as they watched Sophia's video together. David looked at his daughter, brilliant, principled, and no longer ashamed to call him family, and realized he had gained something far more valuable than followers or brand deals. He had gained back his soul, his daughter's respect, and the ability to sleep peacefully, knowing that his work made the world slightly better instead of measurably crueler. It had taken losing everything to discover what actually mattered. But for the first time in years, David Rodriguez was genuinely happy with the person he saw in the mirror. Part 8. The Legacy. 1 year after the confrontation at Sunrise Cafe, The small family restaurant had become an unlikely pilgrimage site for content creators seeking redemption. David's transformation had sparked a broader conversation about ethical content creation, the treatment of service workers, and the possibility of change even after public moral failure. Sunrise Cafe, where Carmen Martinez had delivered one of the most powerful public accountability moments in social media history, had become a symbol of standing up for dignity and respect. Sofia Martinez was now a junior in nursing school, her tuition completely covered by the scholarship fund that bore her name. The fund had grown beyond David's initial contribution, with donations from people inspired by the story of transformation and redemption that had started in their neighborhood cafe. Carmen had been invited to speak at conferences about workplace advocacy and had become a respected voice in discussions about protecting service workers from harassment. Her calm, devastating dismantling of David's behavior had been studied in business schools as a masterclass in addressing customer abuse. And David Rodriguez had found a new kind of influence, one built on accountability rather than attack education rather than exploitation. His community center classes were always full with young content creators learning about ethical engagement and digital citizenship. His speaking engagements at universities and conferences drew audiences eager to understand how someone could fall so far and climb back up. But the most meaningful measure of David's transformation wasn't public recognition. It was private moments with Emma, who had not only forgiven her father, but had become his collaborator in creating educational content about online empathy and responsibility. On the anniversary of what Emma now called the day Dad found his conscience, the Rodriguez family returned to Sunrise Cafe for a quiet lunch. Sofia approached their table with a smile that held no trace of the fear or distress David remembered from their first encounter. The usual, she asked David, who had become a regular customer during his year of making amends. "Just coffee today," David said, "and whatever Carmen recommends from the lunch menu." Sofia laughed. "Mom's in the kitchen making her famous tres leches cake. She says it's to celebrate good news." "What's the good news?" Emma asked. Carmen emerged from the kitchen carrying a beautiful cake, decorated with nursing school colors. "Sofia got accepted to the pediatric nursing program at Children's Hospital," Carmen announced. "Full scholarship with a guaranteed position after graduation." The cafe erupted in applause from customers who had come to know Sofia's story. David felt tears prick his eyes as he watched the young woman whose dignity he had once attacked for content, now being celebrated for achieving her dreams. "Sofia," David said, standing to shake her hand, "I am so proud of you. Those children are going to be lucky to have you as their nurse." Sofia smiled and surprised David by giving him a hug instead of a handshake. "Thank you," she said, "for proving that people can change and for making that change mean something positive for others." Carmen cut the cake and served pieces to the entire cafe, turning Sofia's achievement into a community celebration. As David watched the scene unfold, neighbors congratulating Sofia, Emma filming a heartfelt congratulations video, Carmen beaming with maternal pride, he reflected on how different this felt from the viral content he used to create. This wasn't performance. This wasn't exploitation. This was genuine human connection, authentic celebration, real community support. "Dad," Emma said, nudging him gently, "you're crying." David wiped his eyes, not embarrassed by the tears. "I'm just thinking about how different things could have been if your mom and I had raised you to think other people's pain was entertainment." Emma squeezed his hand. "But you didn't. And even when you lost your way for a while, you found your way back." David's phone buzzed with a notification. His new YouTube channel, focused on digital literacy education and ethical content creation, had just reached 500,000 subscribers. The numbers were impressive, but they didn't give him the same dopamine rush his old confrontation content had provided. This audience was different. These followers engaged thoughtfully shared educational content and used the comment sections to discuss ways to make online spaces more respectful and inclusive. David had learned the difference between building an audience that fed on negativity and cultivating a community committed to positive change. "I have something to share with you all," David announced to the cafe, standing up with Emma's encouragement. The conversations quieted as people turned their attention to him. "A year ago, I came into this cafe and treated Sophia terribly because I thought humiliating service workers would make good content for my social media channels. I was wrong, and Sophia and Carmen changed my life by showing me how wrong I was." David looked around the room at faces that had become familiar over the year of making amends. "Today I want to announce that the Sofia Martinez Scholarship Fund has been expanded. We're partnering with 5 other community colleges to provide full educational support for service workers pursuing careers in healthcare education and social work." The cafe erupted in applause again, but David held up his hand. "More importantly, I want to thank this community for teaching me that accountability doesn't end with apology. It continues with action. You've all shown me what it looks like to support each other, to celebrate achievements, and to believe in people's capacity for growth." David sat back down, but Carmen approached his table. "David," she said, "I have something for you too." She handed him a framed photo, the same image David had seen trending on social media a year ago, showing Carmen confronting him while Sophia stood behind her. But this version was different. It had been cropped to focus on Carmen's determined expression and Sophia's gradual shift from distress to hope as her mother defended her. "This is the moment everything changed," Carmen said. "For Sophia, for you, for everyone who saw that sometimes people do stand up for what's right." David studied the photo, remembering the shame and humiliation he had felt in that moment, but also recognizing it as the beginning of his journey back to being someone his daughter could respect. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not giving up on the possibility that I could be better." Carmen smiled. "My mother used to say that the measure of a person isn't whether they fall down, it's whether they get back up and help others get up too." As the afternoon wound down, David and Emma prepared to leave. Sophia was starting her evening shift, and Carmen was heading home to rest before her own work the next day. "Same time next week?" Sophia asked David. "Wouldn't miss it," David replied. "Emma's going to film a conversation with you about choosing healthcare as a career, despite dealing with difficult people sometimes." Sophia laughed. "I think I can handle that topic." As they walked to their car, Emma linked her arm through David's. "Dad, do you ever regret losing all those followers and brand deals?" David considered the question as he looked back at Sunrise Cafe, where Carmen and Sophia were visible through the window, continuing the work that had made their community stronger and more connected. "You know what I regret?" David said. "I regret that it took me so long to understand that real influence isn't about how many people watch you tear others down. It's about how many people you inspire to build others up." Emma smiled. "I like this version of famous better." David laughed. "Me too, baby, me too." They drove home through a neighborhood where David now knew the shop owners' names, where he had learned to see service workers as individuals with dreams and challenges, rather than props for content creation. His phone sat silent in his pocket. No constant notifications demanding attention, no algorithmic pressure to generate controversy, no compulsion to document every moment for public consumption. Instead, David carried something more valuable, the knowledge that he had used his second chance to make the world slightly better, the respect of a daughter who had watched him fall and then choose to rise, and the proof that redemption was possible for anyone willing to do the hard work of genuine change. The viral video that had destroyed his first career had become the foundation for a better one. And in a small cafe where a mother had once stood up for her daughter's dignity, the legacy of that moment continued to ripple outward, creating scholarships inspiring advocates and proving that sometimes the most powerful content comes not from tearing people down, but from building them up. Respect, as Carmen Martinez had taught them all, truly did begin with how you treated those who served you, but it continued with how you chose to serve others in return. If you find value in real stories told with clarity and truth, make sure to subscribe to stay informed with Real Father Story. This story reminds us that redemption is possible, but it requires genuine accountability, sustained effort, and the humility to rebuild trust one action at a time. While David's initial behavior was inexcusable, his transformation demonstrates that people can change when they're willing to confront their failures honestly and commit to becoming better. Carmen Martinez's defense of her daughter shows us the power of standing up for dignity and respect, while Sophia's eventual forgiveness illustrates the strength found in believing people can grow. Most importantly, this story teaches us that every person serving the public deserves to be treated with basic human respect, regardless of cameras, content creation, or social media pressures.